Today's video is called Equality Street, and it was prompted by a video that I watched by this YouTuber called Gary's Economics. And this guy's got a very, very strong message, very simple message that's very repetitive. And the message is inequality in Britain is out of control, it's too big, and he's calling for greater government involvement in the economy and in our lives to try to reduce that inequality. So I don't know about you, but personally I think we've heard this many times before. Isn't this what Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, Hitler, they all said the same thing? Inequality is a problem. Vote for me, give me more power, and I promise to use that power to fix inequality. You could add Starmer to that list too. So if you go to this guy's YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of very positive comments under his video about, yeah, you're right, Gary, we just need a new government, a bigger and more powerful one. And then, yeah, they'll tackle inequality and everything will be great. And for me, that's quite depressing, really, the number of people who are falling for this nonsense. People who have been indoctrinated in Marxism. They are Marxists without many of them even knowing that they're Marxists. They've been fed this kind of monocultural diet of Marxism at school and university, as I say, completely ignorant of history. You know, the idea that you should give politicians more of your money and more power, and then as a result of that, there'll be less inequality, is absolutely bonkers. It's completely ignorant of history. So some points from me. The first one is equality even desirable? Is it a laudable goal that we should be trying to achieve? You know, certainly equality by outcome, which is basically what Gary's Economics is suggesting, that we need to tax the rich more heavily and then use that money to redistribute it to the poor. This is the fairy story, through welfare benefits. So the thing is you have to understand how rich people get money. You know, somebody who earns a lot of money, they're either one of two things. They're either intelligent and or probably both hard-working. So you want money to be taken from people who are intelligent and hard-working, so it can be given to people who are stupid and lazy. Is that a good thing? You know, you need to understand where those differences in income have actually originated from. Yeah, and also you need to understand the impacts that raising taxes will have on people who earn incomes through voluntary mutually beneficial exchange in the free market. You know, if you tax people, entrepreneurial people, then they'll just give up. What's the point in working really hard if the government's going to take the lion's share of your income? So just as a matter of interest for me, as a teacher working in the private sector, as I was back in the UK, my marginal rate of income tax was 40%. I was paying 10% national insurance, and then when I spent my money, in the main, it was another 20% was taken from me in the form of VAT. There was then excise duties. On top of that, there was council tax, £2,200 a year to have my bin emptied badly every fortnight. And then there was other stealth taxes, like Guildford Council charging me like 15 quid to park my car at Guildford Station on a Saturday. So for me, I was looking at a tax rate of 70%, and that's just as a head of department, a teacher. So Gary's Economics basically leads to what you're experiencing now, an economy that's in self-destruct mode, because there's no incentives for people to work hard. All you're going to get is like a 1970s version of the Tetley Bitter advert. If you can't beat them, join them. What's the point in working really hard in Britain paying taxes, and then your taxes being used to accommodate rubber boat people in 4-star hotels at your expense. It's like, people will stop being mugs. About a month or so ago, I had an email exchange with Nick Hayes of Hayes Reviews, and I don't know whether Nick was playing devil's advocate or not, but he was he was writing some quite interesting things to me that, from my perspective, kind of indicated that he had also suffered from Marxist indoctrination through school and university. So I'll just give you a few quotes. He goes like, would a corporate monopoly use Machiavellian tactics to increase their wealth? Well, that phrase, corporate monopoly, that Nick used, for me just screams Marxist indoctrination. Because what does it actually mean, a corporate monopoly? It kind of implies, you know, Marxists believe that in a free society, over time, competition within a market will diminish and will naturally end up with a monopoly. Now, this is just incorrect. It's just completely incorrect. Basically, in a free society, in a free market, if you have a monopoly and that monopolist tries to either raise prices or cut costs by compromising on the product's quality, then what will happen is that consumers will notice that, other firms will notice that, and they will spot a gap in the market to come in to this industry with a rival product at a lower price and or a better quality. A good example of that actually happening would be in the UK supermarket industry with Lidl and Aldi. It's not happened as much as it should have done though, because the government has planning laws. So you know, these corporate monopolies or corporate oligopolies, they're often they're normally created by the government itself through state regulation. And what the state regulation does is it erects barriers to entry around a market. So that stops new firms coming into that industry, undercutting the competition who might be exploiting the consumer. So the problem here, let's take another example. Train fares in the UK are a rip-off. Why is that? Well, a Marxist would say, oh, well, it's all because of just the inherent flaws of capitalism. When the truth of the matter is, it's the government that's doing it. So if you look at the West Coast Main Line, the government only operates or issues one franchise to operate on that route. So they've created what's called a franchise monopoly. If you look at a different industry, one that is more competitive, that's been deregulated, like the airline industry, you could look at Heathrow Airport. Has it got 2 runways? So what we have here is like different airlines sharing the same infrastructure. It's perfectly possible. We could also have that situation with the railways too. And if we did, rail fares would tumble. Train operators that ran constantly late services, well, they would lose customers to rivals who would operate on the same route, sharing the same infrastructure. You know, if you can share a runway, you can also share a railway line. Another thing that Nick wrote in an email to me that I took issue with, he said capitalists using wealth and influence to control resources and create artificial scarcity to drive demand. So again, for me, this phrase screams Marxist indoctrination. So in a free society, if a firm decided to reduce production and it was a monopolist, then theoretically market supply would decrease and that would elevate prices. So if you tried to create artificial scarcity and you had a monopoly, yeah, you might end up with high prices. But in a free society without state regulation that creates barriers to entry around a market, that would create the following scenario. So supply decreases, prices go up, other firms in other markets would notice that prices in this market have gone up and they would decide to enter that market to steal some of the abnormal profit being earned. So in the long term, market supply would increase again, pushing prices back down, and new entrants would continue to join this market until prices and industry profits were restored to a more reasonable level. So if this doesn't happen, there's a simple reason why it's not happening, and the answer again is state regulation. Regulations that erect a barrier to entry around a market. So a good example would be the banking sector. So it's very, very difficult to get a banking license because of state regulation. Lots of hoops to jump over. So if you think about Bank of Dave, that's a classic example of it. So it's not a surprise that banks can charge rip-off interest rates to borrowers and pay savers absolutely nothing on their savings. And that's because there's no competition in the market. But that isn't a fault of free market capitalism. No, that's the fault of the state. It's the state who erected the barriers to entry. That's why savers and borrowers are ripped off by banks. It's the government that's doing it. It's the government that's creating inequality. Nick also went on about, what was it now, the subversive and Machiavellian tactics of control and domination. So the thing that Nick gets wrong here is that that's got nothing to do with entrepreneurs and got everything to do with the government. It's the government that does this. It's the government that's in the business of control. It's the government that has the monopoly on legalised violence, not private entrepreneurs. And the other kind of big myth to dispel here is, you know, oh, if we have socialism and bigger government, we'll have more equality. It's like bonkers, like completely ignorant of history. If you look at Soviet Russia, for example, there was huge inequality within socialist Russia. There was huge inequality within Hugo Chavez's Venezuela. You know, in Soviet Russia, only party officials got to fly on Konkordsky. You know, there were special lanes on the motorway, so-called ZIL lines that could only be driven on by people who were party members. Ordinary peasants in socialist republics had to wait like decades for their trabants. Not so high-ranking Communist Party officials. So let's dispel this myth that socialism actually results in equality of outcome. It doesn't. It just creates a completely different type of inequality. A type of inequality that's created by force and privilege, rather than a type of inequality that's been created by differences in intelligence and differences in the appetite for hard work and graft that do exist between people. The other thing that people like Gary's Economics and brainwashed Marxists who don't even know that they're Marxists, all the traps that they fall into, they think that higher taxes and more government spending is going to reduce inequality by outcome, whereas in practice the opposite is the case. So if you think about government spending, you know, government spending on war, government spending on the NHS, where does that money go? Where does most of that budget go? Answer: into the pockets of the mates of politicians who run kind of fake private businesses where the only customer is the government. You know, it's like we're actually getting rapidly towards the stage now where I think government spending is little more than a cover story, a money laundering cover story for the transfer of poor people's money into the pockets of rich people. So you pay your taxes and then it gets shoveled off into the pockets of some corporation that's got links to politicians. That has got nothing to do with capitalism. That is socialism. You could say that the goal of the NHS is to take as much of your money from you as possible in the form of tax, and then transfer, get the NHS to spend as much as possible on pharmaceutical products. So it's just, if you cut to the chase here, your money is going into the pockets of pharmaceutical companies. You know, so rather than government spending reducing inequality, it's actually increasing it. The same would apply with even to welfare benefits. If you think about housing benefit, when somebody gets housing benefit, where does the money go? Well, it goes into the pockets of a buy-to-let landlord. Most of them have mortgages. So if you cut to the chase, you're paying taxes, and that's going into the pockets of the bankers in the form of mortgage interest on buy-to-let mortgages. Wake up. The bigger government gets, the more inequality we'll have. So what about the poor? What about the poor? What about the poor? Well, basically, if you want to help the poor, you can do. Nothing to stop you. You know, what socialists do, though, is that they say, yes, the poor must be helped, but we're going to do it with your money. You know, the mythical rich, because I'm not rich enough to help. No, no, no. It's a bit like these people, Gary Lineker types, who want to help migrants, you know, but they're not prepared to help them themselves. They just call on other people, the taxpayer, to do it themselves. If these people really were interested, they'd do it themselves. We got quite a lot of snow today, and before I came out, I was listening to that Irreverent podcast, and they were talking about how the government's urging people to not go to church services and stuff because there's some snow, and it's just bonkers. But again, this taps into socialism. Socialists believe that people are too stupid to run their own lives, and mummy government must run their life for them. So this concept of socialism, it's anti-freedom, you know, that the government can spend your money better than you can yourself. To that I just say it's complete nonsense. You know, let's suppose that you had £1,000 and you wanted to help somebody, some, you know, poor person with that £1,000. Who would you trust with that £1,000? Would you trust Keir Starmer, give him that £1,000? Would you trust him with that money? How about Tony Blair? How about Rishi Sunak? Or how about you or your next door neighbour? Because I know who I would rather trust. So the whole idea that socialism is like a moral system is an inversion. It's a complete inversion of the truth. Socialism is downright evil because it's based on force and compulsion. Somebody sends you a bill for stuff that you never wanted, and then they threaten you with violence. They threaten to throw you in a cage unless you pay what they reckon you owe them. It's completely immoral. It's based on violence or the threat of violence. It's coercion. A moral system is based on voluntary action, which basically ensures mutually beneficial exchange. Both sides benefit. If one side stops benefiting, the exchange stops. That's why in a true free market capitalist society, there is no such thing as exploitation, Nick Hay. Because if one side is exploited, they'll just simply withdraw from that exchange that they perceive to be exploitative. And this is what we need to kind of like understand. But the problem is that we've got a whole generation, if not 2, 3, 4 generations, that don't even know these arguments because they're Marxists without even knowing about it. And that's all I want to say today, so God bless.